For the arduous task of crunching the numbers involved in the latest economic report by the National Bureau of Statistics, we are now being joined by Dr. Andrew Nevin, partner and chief economist at PwC Nigeria, a public intellectual who has played a number of key roles to advance Nigeria's economy and society. You're welcome to the program, Dr. Nevin. Good morning.
Good morning. It's wonderful to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you so much. How did you receive the news, the latest figures from the National Bureau of Statistics as far as Nigeria's economic growth and the indicators, are concerned in terms of the GDP figures that were released? What do you make of it, and what will be your core assessment of what to expect?
Well, let me start out by saying that I'm not a typical economist, and there are a lot of things I believe about the direction of Nigeria, the direction of every economy that don't fit with the orthodoxy. So let me be very direct this morning about it. I would like to know whether Nigerians have enough food or whether they're going hungry. I would like to know whether people are receiving their education. I would like to know whether healthcare is working. I would like to know whether people have meaningful employment. 3.54% GDP growth doesn't tell me any of those things. And I actually have urged before, and I'm going to urge again, I actually think we would be better off if we stopped collecting these statistics, because all that happens is they're statistical artifacts, I call them. They have to do with measuring the output of the entire nation. I think the NBS, as hard as they try, have about 200 agents in the field using the old way of collecting it. It isn't accurate. It has to also do with the way we calculate inflation. We say the official number is 19%, if I remember right. The food inflation is 22%. Many observers say it's higher than that. So I actually don't think that the 3.54% number that the NBS put out yesterday means really anything for the nation. And as I said, I think we should focus on the things that really matter to the Nigerian people and measure those and get better ways of knowing what's really going on the ground in Nigeria across the country.
All right, Andrew, quite spot on there, because of course it's about what this translates to the man on the streets. But let's stay on the macro a little bit, and let's look at borrowing activities at the domestic market level. Now, in light of existing interest rates on, for instance, the Eurobond market, one would understand that the government will be looking inwards a lot more towards the domestic market. What does this mean in terms of where rates could go as a result of that, and investors knowing that the government is still looking inwards at borrowing at the domestic market?
So I've been asked this question 6 or 7 years about, is the level of borrowing too high, the level of debt too high? And my answer for 6 or 7 years has been, we don't have a debt problem, we don't have a borrowing problem, we don't even have a revenue problem. What we have is a growth problem. So if we're growing faster, we're able to collect more taxes. Unfortunately, over the last 6 or 7 years, we haven't had that quick economic growth that results in more taxes, and now we're coming to real fiscal pressure. So we've always said we have a low debt to GDP. It still remains low, but it's now creeping into quite a bit higher number, about 40%, if I remember, 40% of GDP, if I remember correctly. So now we do have an issue. And of course, when we have the deficit spending that we have, and we have the low growth that we have and the pressure in the tax system, the net result is interest rates are going to go up. And we've seen that in the economy. The MPC raised the rates. The spread between the MPC rates and what's actually in the market has gone up. As you rightly said, foreign investors have lost a bit of confidence in Nigeria, so they're not helping coming to the party. So it's going to put more pressure on what the government pays in borrowing. And of course, the danger of this is, in sort of strict economic terms, if we end up in a very vicious negative feedback cycle, so that the interest rates go up, which drive up the deficit because the interest payments are the biggest expense of the federal government, which then drives the interest rates further. You're not sure how that dynamic can play out, but it could be very damaging for Nigeria.
I like the way that you de-emphasize, some of these statistics coming from, different quarters and the need to focus, frankly, on what is real, what the people are feeling. And you mentioned the part of people are feeding adequately and the part of education. So I want to zero down on those two. How much of impact do you think that the Ukrainian-Russian war has had on food security globally? And if you think that Nigeria has responded adequately. And then on the part of education, ASU has been on strike for 6 months. It doesn't look like there will be quick fixes. What are your thoughts for a nation like Nigeria, Africa's biggest economy, yet is struggling to deal with the basic things that affect its citizens?
Yeah, no, I mean, on the grain situation, I think obviously the security situation in Ukraine, the invasion of Ukraine by Russia has affected grains to some extent. But I think people should keep in mind we produce and consume about 2 billion tons of grain around the world. Wheat's not the only grain. Wheat represents about 10% of it. I think about 250 million tons of that. Of course, Ukraine produces, if I remember correctly, 30 or 40 million tons of that. So of the total amount of grain consumed in the world, Ukraine is only less than 2% on that. And people substitute. And I all understand we want to eat pasta, but the reality is when the wheat price goes up, then we need to substitute to other things. This country produces a tremendous amount of cassava. So I think it's had some impact on food security in Nigeria, but the bigger impact on food security in Nigeria is, of course, the security situation in Nigeria. Because what's happening in Nigeria, I mean, I've followed the agricultural sector very closely for about 13 years in this country. What's happening is many farmers, because of their concern for their safety, rightly so, are reducing what they grow. They're not going very far from the village. They're staying in the village, just the small plots. So the next harvest is going to be quite a bit smaller than we need. So if we really want to solve the food security situation, we need to solve the overall security situation in Nigeria. And then, do you want me to go on to talk about education?
That's fine, please do. Yes, please.
Okay, so we have a very simple view at PwC that we have put forward for the last number of years. We put out a paper back in 2019 that said actually Nigeria's biggest export isn't oil, it's Nigerian brains. I mean, the diaspora is remarkable. The economic power of the diaspora contributes more foreign exchange, and brains are what's valuable. And we called Nigeria the barbell economy. So you have the lowest value-added product on the planet, oil, which we export, and you have the highest value-added product, which we export, which is brains. Now, which do you want to be exporting, the highest value-added or the lowest value-added? Some people argue we should be going into low-end manufacturing like China or Vietnam did several decades ago. So why would you move from oil to low-end manufacturing? We're already exporting a lot of brains. I mean, I really enjoyed listening to Theo and Adam on the segment before talking about Nollywood. That's an export of Nigerian brains, creativity into the world, and that's what we should be focused on. So then you take the ASU strike, and this is a tragedy. I mean, we're not investing very much in Nigerian universities. The amount that's being asked for by ASU is quite small, yet we choose to subsidize the foil subsidy, 6.4 trillion naira this year, rather than invest in Nigerian brains, which are earning the return for the country, whether they're in the country or out of the country. In fact, what's happening in the world is now more and more people can work remotely, and I'm sure you know Nigerians who are using their brain power to earn FX for this country who are now staying in Nigeria. I mean, I can cite many examples, but I'll cite the incredible story of Amal Hassan. So she is a national heroine. She's the CEO of Outsource Global, which is based here in Abuja. She has 1,000 employees delivering high-level services, legal services, accounting services, BPO, coding for employment, call center services, 700 of them in Abuja, 300 of them in Kaduna on that. And she's earning FX for this country, exporting Nigerian brains. So that's what we should be investing in. So then you have an ASU strike. And of course, it's not just this one strike, which has now gone on 6 months. I think during the last 7 years, if I remember correctly, and have the numbers right, there's 578 days that the universities have been on strike. So that is an economic calamity. The loss in brain capital for this country is just immense. And I've never seen a calculation. I guess we need to do that calculation just to remind everyone of what it means when you delay someone's education 6 months, a year and a half, 2 years. The cost is just immense. And it's something that has to come to an end. But our view is very simple. If we continue to invest in the brain capital of this nation, the nation will be prosperous.
Right, Andrew. It's very interesting that you touch on that. Of course, at the end of the day, we have inflation. We are going through it. Everybody's feeling the pinch. We also have worsening exchange rate regime. Now, the Monetary Policy Committee recently moved the MPR from 13% to 14% while retaining other parameters. Would you consider this a sound move in taming inflation, especially as this isn't the first time we're seeing a tightening in this regard?
Well, I think the MPC is perhaps either one of or perhaps the most technically competent committee we have in this country. And the decisions they've made over the years of moving interest rates and CRR and the parameters that they control have been fine. And of course, they were put in a position they had to raise the rates from 13 to 14%. As I said earlier, given what's happening and the pressure with the budget deficits and funding, they may have to raise them further. So I've never had an issue of the MPC making the right or wrong decision. But I think what people need to understand is the MPC is like an F1 race driver. And if you put an F1 race driver in a 2022 car, they're going to go at a 2022 speed. If you put an F1 race driver in a 1960s F1 car, they're going to go at the 1960s speed. The issues that we have in the country can't be solved by the MPC. So the MPC is doing their job, very technically competent, as I said. The way we need to address our issues, though, is other actors in this economy and society.
All right, Dr. David, I'm interested in the report of the PwC on the education sector that you referred to. And the brain box.
Well, we haven't written the one that talks about the cost of the strike, so I need to write that. But we are coming out with a paper exactly on this brain capital issue and the way we can solve our FX crisis. So the only way we think we can solve the FX crisis is to have remote workers in Nigeria serving global value chains and bringing in foreign currency. And of course, COVID has taught us that you can do many more jobs remotely than we ever thought. There's about 28 million programmers around the world. That number is going to 45 million. There's, BPO is something that's really supported India starting in the 1990s, supported the Philippines. We have animation, of course, we're exporting Nollywood. So exporting into those global value chains is the only way that we're going to fix our FX problem. So we're going to put out the number as a challenge to the nation over the next 7 to 10 years. We think there should be 2 million young Nigerians who end up in these global value chains, and we think it's quite doable. And of course, we're not the first people saying that. I mean, if you go to His Excellency Governor Obaseki in Edo State, I mean, he has a program that is aimed at 15,000 young Edo State resident indigenes, Benin City, going to coding for employment. So we can do that, but that's the only way I see of solving, or we see as solving our FX problem. And this paper is going to come out in the next week or two from PwC. But COVID has really made it an opportunity for us because it's much easier to work remotely than it was. I mean, 20 years ago, if we wanted to work in global value chains, you had to become part of the diaspora. 10 years ago, we started some of this business processing outsourcing that I discussed that Amal Hassan leads in this country. But now so many things can be done remotely, and it's a real chance to grow the economy, and not just in Lagos or in Abuja, but in as I said, in Benin City, and there are many governors that are now really switched on and recognize how critical ICT is. If we go back to those official statistics, and I know I'm very critical of them all the time. But the ICT sector, of course, is now broadly is the largest sector in the country, almost 20% of the official economy, official GDP numbers. And that includes all of this coding for employment, business process outsourcing. It also includes Nollywood, which is a fantastic export on that. So that's the path forward. And we should be the brain capital nation, exporting brain capital, having people staying in Nigeria, and we can do that.
How will that tie to the issue of diaspora remittances, which people, put at between 18 to 20 billion dollars, and some other people will argue that it's probably up to 25, billion dollars currently. How will this proposition that you have tie into that without people thinking that yes, we are brain capital of the continent, but then it's not a question of brain drain, having your best brains to leave the country and working abroad?
Well, we now have it side by side. So we would have the diaspora. The diaspora is incredible. I had a chance to attend and give some remarks at the Diaspora Day on July 25th. Chairwoman Dabiri Abike is absolutely fantastic. We all recognize the value of the diaspora. The other thing that's happening with the diaspora is people now recognize at the state level they're engaging their diaspora. They need the diaspora for skills. They need them for investment. They need to be engaged. Yesterday, I had the Honorable Commissioner for Ondo State Diaspora Affairs, a meeting with him, really exciting about what they're seeing. And people may not know, 10 hospitals in Nigeria in the last 2 years have been built by the diaspora, including the hospital where His Excellency Professor Yemi Osinbajo, Dr. Professor Yemi Osinbajo, had his treatment recently on that. So the diaspora is having an incredible impact on the country. And of course, we, along with NIDCOM, we don't use the term brain drain. We use the term brain circulation in this country because so many of the diaspora are connected. I'll give you another example, which is incredible to me. I have a dear friends who live in Kitchener, Canada, which many people watching may be aware. It's not too far from Mississauga or Oakville, where many of the Canadian diaspora, Nigerians who are settling in Canada are. They're in Kitchener. They've been there about 4 years. And they're just getting citizenship in September 7th, I believe, so in a couple of weeks. And he is being asked to run as a new Canadian for political office and is running right now in Kitchener, which is an incredible diaspora story. But at the same time, his wife Falaki is the founder of Emergency Response Africa, which is essentially the ambulance service in Lagos. And her business is doing very well in Lagos. She's going to a number of other states on that. And that just shows you this power of the brain circulation. You have a couple with children who went to Canada a few years ago, contributing to Canadian society in a very positive way, but also contributing to Nigerian development and society. And you see that so many people in the diaspora. So so we're going to keep that. But what we're saying is we can now add to that by having people participate in these global value chains while remaining in Nigeria. And not just in Lagos or Abuja, as I said, but in every place, in Kaduna, in Kano, in Maiduguri. I mean, Amal wants to put a call center in Maiduguri so we can have educated Borno State residents who are able to stay there, university educated, and work in Maiduguri, which would just be fantastic. So we need both. We need to continue the development of the diasporas, and NIDCOM's done a fantastic job. The states are all now developing their plans and engaging with the diaspora, but simultaneously we need to grow this cohort of young Nigerians that are working in global value chains, getting paid in dollars, getting paid at higher rates, bringing that money back to the country, buying houses, going out to restaurants and parties, buying furniture, and that will drive the entire economy.
Understood, Andrew. You spoke earlier about some of the limitations on the part of the embassy in terms of its capabilities and perhaps jurisdiction. Let's look at the relationship between Nigeria's fiscal and monetary policy functions, as the cohesion between both appears quite lax, one could say. What are some of the implications of this discordance, if I could put it that way, and how best can it be addressed?
Well, let me break things into three pieces. So there's monetary policy, and I've talked about the role of the MPC. There's fiscal policy, which for today we'll just say is, are you deficit spending or not deficit spending? How much are you pumping into the economy? And there's always a question whether these two things are in sync. But even more importantly is the structural situation. I mean, a lot of the challenges that we have in our view are because of the complexity of the federal government of Nigeria apparatus. So we're all familiar with the Orange Shea report. Came out in 2013. His Excellency President Buhari, I believe, assented, I think in April of 2020, he said we were moving forward with it. But of course we had COVID, so it never really got implemented. We're now coming to the end of His Excellency's second term, and he said again they want to implement it to streamline and simplify. Because it's not just that people talk about the cost of governance in this country, particularly at the federal level, and that's an issue, but it's also the complexity of it when you're in the private sector. And of course, one of the things that's really changed in the last 5 years is certainly the federal government of Nigeria has made progress in saying it really recognizes the criticality of the public sector. So we have the new Nigeria Development Plan that's been put out. It says 85% of the capital required has to come from the private sector. Absolutely correct. But the question is, will the private sector invest that capital? Well, there are people too, things are complex. If things are too complex, it becomes difficult for them. So when there's so many multiple agencies that you need to deal with, and of course, because of the fiscal pressure, increasing number of multiple taxes and levies on it, it becomes a real problem. So when we say coordination between monetary and fiscal policy, I think our view over the years has been actually we need to address some of these structural issues. And of course, we have the big distortions, which also are out there really affecting us. I mean, we all see, what's happening with the foreign exchange situation. People may be aware that Emirates Airline has said it's going to stop flying into Nigeria. British BA said yesterday that it would do the same in December. This morning it was reported that the government's releasing some dollars, the CBN's releasing some dollars for that particular sector. But of course, it's not just that sector, it's the telecom sector, it's the man sector. So the way we've set up this FX structure where you have to ask the CBN for dollars and they allocate it, based on what they have in ways that are not entirely clear, has created real problems for us. So we have these structural issues in electricity, in the foil subsidy, as I mentioned, and in FX. We have the complexity of the federal government that the Orange Shade report really highlighted. And those are the two issues that we think we should really be focused on. But in terms of the kind of, I'll call it the day-to-day management of fiscal policy, I mean, I think the Ministry of Finance, Budget and National Planning, the Honorable Minister Zainab Ahmed is doing a fantastic job. That's one of the best ministries in this country.
Well, I mean, thanks. I was actually coming to the issue of the struggle for foreign exchange and what is happening with the airlines. Yes, you were correct that the CBN has released. The total actually was $265 million, which is still a far cry from the $450 million that the airlines are asking for. You made a reference to how brain circulation and the rest can rescue the country from the scarcity of forex. How do you think, in particular, these problems with the aviation sector can be tackled? Because if people have bought tickets, whether you bought with Naira or in dollars, remittances are meant to be made. What would be your specific suggestions to the CBN and to the federal government in tackling this immediate crisis that is bedeviling the aviation sector?
Well, I think that my recommendation would be, the CBN actually committed, and the federal government committed back, I think maybe 4 or 5 years ago, to say we were moving towards market-determined exchange rates. And we made some progress in that direction, the different windows, and the parallel market gap at that time was not that high. Of course, for a number of reasons, that gap has really widened, and the commitment to coming to market-determined exchange rates has gone away. My own recommendation, I won't include PwC in this, and I'm not sure if everyone would agree, was I think the federal government should do a one-time adjustment to help out the airlines, the manufacturers, the telecom companies with some dollars to ease their immediate pressure, and then they should float the exchange rate on that. And they should tell people, you're responsible for getting your own foreign exchange. I mean, there aren't in another country, you don't go to the central bank and ask for foreign exchange for school fees abroad. I mean, we're importing education when we do that. Why would the CBN support people who are importing education and using these scarce dollars? In other countries, you don't give people money to go travel abroad in the personal travel allowance. And of course, the governor came out maybe 6 months ago and said this. He said, it's not the CBN's responsibility to give you dollars, and we're going to move away from that system. So that would be the major step. But I don't think they could do that today. I think they would need to give some relief, take some of the reserves that we have and give some relief to these key sectors that are under real pressure. So as I said, aviation, manufacturing, and telecom being the key ones, because they all have to buy equipment in dollars. And of course, also, I think the Dangote refinery needs to come to completion. Very urgent. I mean, it's been a real impact on our society and economy with the delays in the Dangote refinery. So that also probably needs some final dollars for completion. But after that final round, I would announce that we're doing this final round, but after that, don't come to the CBN for dollars. You need to start to create some markets for dollars. And of course, as I said, a company like Amal Hassan's Outsource Global, they're getting paid in dollars and they're getting paid in pounds. And to the extent that we can start to grow that rapidly, that's going to really help us. But the other thing that I would say is, in terms of import substitution, the things that we should be focusing on substituting for are health and education, not low-end manufactured goods. So there's some discussion, there's always this, why import something? But actually a low-end manufacturing good, in my view, is a good deal for Nigeria. What's expensive for Nigeria is when we import education and healthcare. So that import in this case means people going abroad for their education and healthcare. Those things are very expensive. And a lot of it is invisible because, of course, of the Iboki system. So if there's a university student in in Canada, it's not visible, the fact that that's an import of education, because the way they're getting their Canadian dollars is from the diaspora in Canada who are doing informal exchanges. So that import is invisible, but it's still there. We really need to focus on the health and education sectors to make sure that we build them up domestically, and we're not spending, I think Nairametrics, the fantastic site, UGO's site, estimated we're spending $3 to $4 billion on health and education imports into this country every year. So that's where I would focus the efforts of the country.
All right, Andrew, just staying on more long-term solutions. The CBN, and I'm sorry I keep staying with the Apex Bank here, but CBN has referenced global headwinds and supply chain disruptions amongst other external factors in relation to rising inflation. What are the more sustainable measures that could be adopted in curtailing the current state, or are these also completely beyond the CBN's purview?
Well, I think that, I mean, every central bank, every government, uses the concept of headwinds to when they're having challenges. And I mean, the CBN's exactly right. There have been headwinds, COVID and supply chain disruption. But the major thing that is actually hampering us right now, of course, is the reduction in the production of crude oil. So you think about the situation we're in. Crude oil is close to $100. It was up as much as $135. If you had told me when I arrived here 13, 14 years ago that we would be in a situation where we have $100 US dollar oil and yet we're struggling, I would be, how is that possible? We're supposed to be an oil economy, right? And of course, we came out and said that when we were making 2 million barrels a day, we said we're not really an oil economy given how many Nigerians. Well, now we're making 1 million barrels. I mean, the number in July that I read was 1.0 something. So, 1 million barrels a day, and we all understand the reasons for it. But that's what's killing us in the short term. I mean, obviously there's no long-term future in oil, but to make the transitions that I've discussed, and of course some investments in infrastructure, the reduction in oil is what's really crushing us, much more than these headwinds from the Ukrainian situation or the supply chain on it. It's just astonishing that we're at $100 oil and we're struggling so much. And of course, that's why we're getting 670, 710 in the parallel market. That has exploded because of that. But if we were producing even 1.6 or 2 as we were supposed to be producing a few years ago, we would be in a much better shape. And of course it's compounded because we subsidize so much fuel. I mean, I think we subsidize the equivalent of 400,000 or 500,000 barrels of oil. So effectively we're getting no benefit from the oil that we do have, even in the short term.
All right, Dr. Andrew Nevin, we want to thank you so much for joining us on the morning show today and for sharing this brilliant perspective. Thank you so much.